Everything you need is on this laptop. I suggest you look at it.
I don't think I will. Now, if you'll excuse me.
Mind telling me what's on that device?
I'm afraid that's privileged information.
Her research on dialectal deception and code switching for the CIA was groundbreaking, but none of that mattered the moment Officer Gary Whitman stepped in front of her. He leaned lazily against his squad car, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, aren't you a unique kind of English speaker?" His voice carried the calculated derision of someone who assumed superiority by birth, uniform, and skin color. Layla's stomach twisted, a flash of disbelief making her hands tremble. "Excuse me," she asked, voice steady despite the sting. "You talk funny," he said, loud enough for the pedestrians to glance. "Sounds different." She clenched her fists, blood roaring in her ears. Every instinct screamed to flee, to correct him, to make him understand. But she also knew that arguing here, now, meant risking more than embarrassment. A camera on a nearby news van tilted toward them, capturing every syllable. The world seemed to hold its breath. Whitman's smirk widened. "Maybe I should call your supervisor, see if she's worth my time." Layla's mind raced, calculating, resisting panic. She forced her lips into a smile. "Go ahead. You'll regret it." Whitman's laughter cut through the air like a whip crack, echoing off the concrete facades. Then the traffic light changed, the world moved, and Whitman's gaze followed her into the building, leaving her heart hammering and an unshakable question hanging. "Does he know who I really am?" Layla Thompson adjusted her scarf against the late winter chill, the thin breeze tugging at the edges of her coat as she walked toward the downtown government plaza. The building loomed, its glass facade reflecting fractured sunlight. Her steps echoed on the marble as she approached the entrance, the strap of her messenger bag pressing into her shoulder. She had rehearsed her presentation countless times. This briefing with the CIA liaison was pivotal. A sharp voice interrupted her focus. Well, what do we have here?" Layla glanced up. Officer Gary Whitman leaned against his squad car, uniform crisp, badge gleaming. His smirk had the weight of entitlement, the kind that made others freeze in place. "Excuse me." Her voice was steady, controlled. "You talk funny," he said, eyes narrowing, scanning her with obvious amusement. "Sounds different." The words struck, simple yet cutting. Passers-by slowed, some curious, most pretending not to hear. Layla's stomach clenched, but her mind raced. She had faced microaggressions before, subtle dismissals, the cold shoulder, the automatic assumption that she was less capable. This was the bluntest yet, and it was public. I'm here for the briefing," she said, forcing a neutral tone. Whitman's smirk widened. "Maybe I should call your supervisor, see if she's worth my time." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "He doesn't know who I am. Yet." Her mind ticked through options, weighing confrontation against prudence. A small part of her wanted to storm off, to demand respect outright. But experience taught restraint. Retaliation could mean real consequences here, consequences disproportionate to the slight. Layla's gaze flicked to the windows of the government building, imagining the secure floors above. Her work mattered more than his arrogance. She forced her lips into a smile. "Go ahead. You'll regret it." Whitman's laughter carried across the plaza, rough and unyielding. Pedestrians moved aside, uneasy. He shoved off from the squad car and walked parallel to her, keeping pace as if shadowing prey. She ignored him, counting her steps to the security checkpoint. Each footfall was deliberate, a silent assertion of presence. Cameras swiveled overhead, capturing faces and movements. Whitman glanced up at the lens and smirked, a casual acknowledgement of surveillance. "Really, you think anyone will back you up?" he called, voice low but venomous. Layla didn't respond. Her internal calculations continued, emergency exits, office entry, proximity of other officers, all details logged. She felt a flash of anger, tempered by necessity. His authority was a weapon, his ignorance, a danger. As she reached the building's revolving doors, Whitman's gaze lingered. A gust of wind carried his laughter behind her. Her pulse thrummed, not with fear but with the urgent clarity of a threat recognized and measured. The door closed, sealing her inside. The plaza fell silent behind the glass. Yet the echo of his mockery followed, a shadow of confrontation unresolved. Layla's hand rested on the elevator button. Trembling slightly, awareness sharpened. Somewhere above, her audience waited. Somewhere below, his presence lingered. Does he know who I really am? The elevator chimed. She stepped in. The doors slid shut. The world outside dimmed. But the question remained, unresolved, chilling. Layla's heels clicked sharply against the polished marble as she entered her office suite, a low hum of fluorescent lights filling the space. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, a mundane scent, grounding her after the public humiliation outside. Her computer screen glowed with the draft of her briefing notes, CIA standard formatting blinking back at her. She sat, exhaled, and tried to focus, but the memory of Whitman's laughter clung stubbornly. A knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Whitman leaning in, casual, like he belonged there. His uniform was immaculate, his badge glinting under the overhead light. "Back so soon?" he said, voice dripping amusement. "Thought I'd make sure you got here okay." Layla's jaw tightened. "Officer Whitman, this is private property. You shouldn't be here." He stepped further inside, ignoring her. "Relax. Just making conversation. Don't get defensive on me. You know how it looks." "I know exactly how it looks. You're harassing me," she said, rising to her full height. Her tone was calm, deliberate, controlled. She would not give him the satisfaction of visible fear. Whitman's smirk didn't waver. "Harassment. Oh, come on. I'm just curious. You have some kind of clearance, right? Something high level." His eyes narrowed as if calculating risk versus reward. "I could report this, see if your bosses think you're worthy." Layla's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to remain measured. The mention of her clearance was dangerous. She had been trained for pressure, for intimidation, for situations exactly like this. Her voice was quiet, cutting through the tense air. "Do that. I'm ready." Whitman laughed softly, pacing in front of her desk. "You're bold for someone in your position. Or maybe just naive. Most people would crawl, beg, or call someone else. But not you, her." Her hands clenched on the edge of her desk. Every word he spoke was a test, a measure of dominance, a signal that the system favored him over her. She recalled every past instance, microaggressions in meetings, colleagues dismissing her, assumptions that her intelligence was secondary to her ethnicity. Each memory sharpened her focus, hardened her resolve. Whitman leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I hear you're working on something sensitive. Something people really want to know about. Maybe I should dig a little deeper." Layla's mind raced. He had no right, no clearance, yet his arrogance made him dangerous. One misstep could compromise not only her position but her entire mission. "Dig all you want," she said, her words precise. "I guarantee you'll find nothing you understand." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, fast and subtle. He masked it with a smirk and leaned back against the wall. "You're confident. Dangerous confidence for someone so unproven. Careful, Thompson. Not everyone gets a second chance with the law." Layla didn't flinch. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, mentally mapping threats and contingencies. Every phrase, every glance, every gesture mattered. "I've learned to manage threats from all kinds of people, including men who think uniform equals authority." Whitman's laughter returned, sharper this time, more irritated. He turned toward the door, lingering just long enough to cast a shadow over her workspace. "We'll see about that," he said, voice low, dangerous. "Just remember, I know someone's watching. Don't think you're untouchable." The moment stretched. Layla's pulse throbbed beneath her calm exterior. She waited until the door clicked shut behind him, leaving only the faint scent of his cologne and the residual tension in the room. Her eyes returned to her screen, scanning the notes for errors, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Whitman's insinuations were not idle threats, they were tests, probes into her life, her work, her authority. She thought about the institutional walls surrounding her. Security protocols, clearance levels, procedural hierarchies, they existed, but often they bent under the weight of bias. Whitman was proof of that, a living example of power unearned yet flaunted. The question was not if he would act, it was when. Layla's phone buzzed. An encrypted message from her CIA liaison appeared. Proceed as planned. Ignore distractions. She exhaled, steadying her heartbeat, parsing the reminder of her purpose. The briefing was non-negotiable. Her work mattered more than his arrogance. Minutes later, Whitman returned, glancing around with an almost casual air. Nice office. Very impressive. His tone carried the insinuation that he could dismantle her with a single phone call. Layla didn't respond. She watched him retreat down the corridor, counting steps, noting turns, memorizing timing. Every detail could become leverage, every observation part of a careful strategy. She reminded herself that patience was weaponized intellect. Impulsive retaliation could destroy more than him, it could destroy her. As she sank into her chair, her mind revisited the plaza incident, his words echoing with an unfamiliar edge. Whitman had crossed a line, and now he was probing, testing, calculating. The threat had escalated from public humiliation to personal intrusion. Layla's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She began drafting secure notes, documenting the encounter meticulously. Every word he had said, every gesture, every implied threat. Evidence, if needed. Her calm exterior masked a mind racing with contingency, anticipating moves and counter-moves, fully aware that Whitman's next step could change everything. The tension in the room settled into a quiet hum, only to be broken by the faint click of the elevator. Someone else was coming. Her pulse quickened again. Whitman's shadow lingered somewhere, but she would meet it armed with precision, not panic. The secure briefing room smelled of disinfectant and recycled air. Layla adjusted her notes on the polished conference table, her CIA-issued laptop humming softly in front of her. The liaison, a stern woman in a tailored grey suit, flipped through the summary Layla had prepared on dialectal deception and code switching, the kind of linguistic analysis that could intercept covert communications in real time. Layla's pulse thrummed, partly from nerves, partly from the lingering anger she carried from Whitman's earlier intrusion. Every detail mattered in this room, every misstep could compromise months of work. She arranged her charts, voice steady, explaining phonetic patterns, regional nuances, and potential operational applications. Then, unexpectedly, the door creaked. Whitman stepped into the hallway, his boots scraping against the tile. He paused, glancing at the partially closed door. Sounds important, he muttered to himself, just loud enough to carry through the crack. Layla's stomach twisted. Her throat tightened. Her mind raced, calculating risks. One careless exposure, one moment of curiosity from him, could compromise everything. She glanced at the liaison, who raised a brow but didn't intervene. Whitman pushed the door further, leaning in. What's all this, then? Sounds fancy. His smirk carried over the gap, arrogance as heavy as iron. Layla took a slow breath. Officer Whitman, she said, measured, every syllable deliberate. This is classified. You are not authorized to view any of this material. His laughter was soft but sharp, like breaking glass. Classified, huh? Must be something impressive if you're working for them. He waved a hand toward the charts and screens, curiosity masking his disdain. Ever think maybe you're overcomplicating things? Layla's eyes narrowed. The room seemed to shrink around him. I work with complex systems, she replied, voice firm. Your opinion is irrelevant. Your intrusion is unacceptable. Whitman leaned back, crossing his arms. You always this serious? Or is it the uniform that makes people act like this around you? The liaison cleared her throat, but Whitman ignored the warning. Layla's mind flashed to prior incidents, colleagues who minimized her expertise, supervisors who assumed compliance, street harassment masked as curiosity. She recognized the same pattern now, entitlement masquerading as authority. She shifted her stance, her hands resting lightly on the laptop. You're testing boundaries, she said, voice calm but cutting. Every intrusion you make leaves a trace. Every movement recorded. You should leave. Whitman's smirk faltered for an instant. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, certainly not by someone whose authority was invisible to most but undeniable in practice. His curiosity battled his ego. Recorded. What do you mean? Surveillance, Layla said simply, eyes unwavering. Every unauthorized action in this building triggers logs, cameras, and alerts. Every step you take outside your jurisdiction can and will be documented. He hesitated. A subtle shift in posture betrayed unease, though he masked it quickly with forced bravado. Well, you make it sound so serious. Guess I'll just leave you to your spy stuff. Layla allowed a small nod, maintaining her composure. She knew Whitman's ego would prevent him from showing fear outright. Her strategic patience was her advantage. As he retreated, the room exhaled, though tension lingered. The liaison leaned forward, fingers tapping lightly against the table. He doesn't understand what he just walked into, she said. Good work maintaining composure. That could have escalated quickly. Layla exhaled quietly, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. She returned to her presentation, voice steady, highlighting linguistic anomalies in intercepted communications. Every phrase was precise, every chart meticulously explained. The sound of boots echoing down the hall reminded her of the plaza, of the office intrusion, of Whitman's smirk. But this time, she felt different, prepared, vigilant, armed with both knowledge and strategic advantage. Her role wasn't merely to teach, it was to protect the integrity of the operation and, incidentally, to expose any overreach by those who assumed power unjustly. By the end of the briefing, the liaison's nod was firm, approving. Layla's work was recognized, her competence undeniable. Whitman, however, lingered in the periphery of her mind, not physically, but as a looming threat. She catalogued every detail, every word, every expression. The final moment came as she packed her materials, checking the locks and secure protocols. A faint vibration on her phone indicated an encrypted message from the CIA. All secure. Incident logged. Monitor closely. Whitman's intrusion had failed. Yet the exposure of his curiosity, his arrogance, and his disregard for boundaries had left a lingering sense of unease. Layla understood one thing clearly: he underestimated her. And that miscalculation would soon become his undoing. The day ended with a quiet hum of fluorescent lights and locked doors. But the knowledge that Whitman had been in proximity to sensitive information, even briefly, left a silent, chilling question in the back of her mind. How far would he push before his curiosity turned destructive? The cafe smelled of espresso and toasted bread, the chatter of patrons blending into a low hum. Layla sat at a corner table, laptop open but largely ignored, eyes scanning the street outside. The winter sunlight angled through the tall windows, casting long, thin shadows across the worn wooden floor. She nursed a cup of green tea, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the incidents with Whitman, the plaza, the office, the unwelcome intrusion into the CIA briefing. Her thoughts fractured when a familiar shadow fell across the floor. Whitman leaned casually against the doorway, sunglasses masking his eyes. The smirk was there, as predictable as it was infuriating. "Well, fancy seeing you here," he said, voice deceptively light. Layla did not look up immediately. She measured him, observing the angle of his stance, the subtle tension in his jaw. "Officer Whitman," she said finally, tone neutral. "Do you have business here, or are you following me again?" He chuckled, stepping closer. "Business. Maybe. Curiosity. Definitely. You're always so on edge, it's fascinating." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat without invitation. Other patrons glanced up but quickly returned to their conversations, unwilling to intervene. Layla's fingers hovered over her laptop, typing lightly, creating a record. "This is harassment. You are trespassing socially, if not legally. I suggest you leave." Whitman leaned back, smirk widening. "You really think you can intimidate me? You think your little warnings matter?" She met his gaze evenly. "I don't need to intimidate you. I need you to understand. Your actions have consequences, whether you recognize them or not." He tilted his head, feigning disinterest, but his fingers drummed lightly against the table. Consequences? For what? Me laughing at someone else's speech? Or is it the whole spy thing again? Layla's jaw tightened. She leaned forward slightly, voice low but precise. This isn't about speech. It's about respect, boundaries, and the law. Every move you make outside your authority is logged, every intrusion noted. You are not above oversight, Officer Whitman. His smirk faltered for a brief second, a crack in his confident armor. You're prepared. I'll give you that, he said, voice almost begrudging. Not many people have the nerve to call me out directly. Layla's eyes sharpened. Prepared is not a matter of nerve, it's awareness. And awareness includes knowing when someone like you is overreaching. Whitman's gaze flicked toward the ceiling, subtle tension in his shoulders. You know, you're dangerous, he muttered, half to himself. Most people would just fold. But not you. Layla leaned back, calm but firm. Dangerous. Perhaps to those who underestimate me. But I'm not reckless. Every action I take is calculated. The conversation paused, a silent battle of wills. Outside, the city moved obliviously. Inside, a different rhythm governed their exchange, strategy against arrogance, intellect against entitlement. Whitman finally pushed back his chair, standing abruptly. I'll leave for now, he said, voice tight. But I'll be watching. Don't think you're untouchable. Layla remained seated, observing his retreat. She noted the precise path he took, his hesitant glances toward the exit, the way his fingers flexed as if resisting an urge to act impulsively. Every detail was a record in her mind, a catalogue for future reference. As the door swung closed, a camera mounted in the cafe corner shifted its angle. Whitman had unknowingly left a trail, every step captured for review. Layla exhaled quietly, sipping her tea, letting the tension drain slowly from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. An encrypted message lit the screen. Whitman observed. Evidence secured. Continue operation. She typed a brief acknowledgement, mind alert but disciplined. The confrontation had escalated, but it had not yet broken her. Layla returned to her laptop, resuming work on her secure document. Each keystroke was deliberate, a subtle assertion of control. The cafe's warmth contrasted sharply with the chill of the threats she faced outside. Whitman's shadow lingered, intangible but real, reminding her of the systemic power he represented. She reflected on the pattern. Public humiliation, office intrusion, direct confrontation in a public space. Each action was a test, probing her limits, measuring her responses. She had anticipated escalation, had prepared contingencies, and yet the emotional weight pressed down like a silent hand. By the time she packed her laptop and left, the cafe was quiet, the sun low on the horizon. Whitman's smirk was gone, replaced by a faint tension he could not entirely disguise. Layla walked away with measured steps, aware of the surveillance, aware of the stakes, aware that the confrontation had shifted the balance subtly but irrevocably. Whitman had underestimated her patience, her strategy, and her ability to wield observation as a weapon. For the first time, he had left uncertain, exposed, and the first cracks in his arrogance had appeared. Layla's mind catalogued every detail for later analysis. Timing, tone, gesture, proximity. She understood that her resilience would not just protect her work, but also set in motion a series of events that could hold Whitman accountable. The exposure was beginning, and she was ready to navigate the next moves carefully, deliberately, with precision. The hum of fluorescent lights in the Internal Affairs office was almost oppressive. Layla sat rigidly in the chair, laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard. Across from her, an investigator named Morales tapped a pen rhythmically on his notepad, eyes scanning the detailed notes she had submitted. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the atmosphere charged with quiet tension. "Let's go over this again," Morales said, voice clipped. "You say Officer Whitman harassed you in public, intruded into secure areas, and made threats regarding your professional duties." "Yes," Layla replied, steady. Every encounter was documented. Surveillance footage, timestamps, witness statements where applicable. I've provided the log of his presence during the secure briefing, the cafe confrontation, and the initial incident at the plaza. Morales raised a brow, flipping through the folder. You understand that this sort of claim is sensitive. We need corroboration. And you understand the institution has a reputation to maintain. We can't simply take accusations at face value. Layla's jaw tightened. She had anticipated this. I understand, Morales. That is why I've included evidence from multiple sources, both digital and human, to ensure accuracy. This is not about reputation, it's about accountability. The investigator leaned back, fingers steepled. You've got nerve, Thompson. Most people wouldn't go this far without fearing retaliation. I've already faced retaliation, she said quietly. I've faced microaggressions, dismissals, and direct threats. I am not here to avoid consequences. I am here to ensure proper protocol is observed. Morales studied her, noting the clarity in her eyes, the precise articulation of her argument. Most people wouldn't compile all this and remain calm under pressure. But you've done both. She gave a small nod. Calm was a strategy. Panic would compromise her, and Whitman was counting on that. Very well, Morales said, flipping through more pages. We'll need to interview witnesses, review surveillance footage, and cross-check with your internal secure logs. You've done a thorough job here. If anything, this makes our task easier, but it also puts a target on your back. Are you prepared for that? Layla's lips pressed together. I've already navigated this risk. It's calculated. Every step is documented. Morales leaned forward, tone softer but still firm. Whitman will notice. He'll suspect someone is building a case. It could escalate. Are you prepared for the potential fallout? I am, she said. Her mind traced contingencies for every possible reaction. Intimidation, smear attempts, public questioning of her authority. Each was anticipated. Each had a countermeasure. I've documented every step. The data is solid. His missteps are logged. His arrogance is visible on record. The investigator paused, studying her expression. I have to admit, most officers don't respond well to scrutiny. But you've anticipated it. That makes this different. Layla's gaze flicked to the secure monitor in the corner of the room, displaying feeds from various cameras she had approved for review. Every movement, every interaction logged. Whitman's face appeared briefly in one feed, his posture casual, unaware of the net tightening around him. Morales nodded, tapping the pen against the table. We'll start interviews tomorrow. Your evidence will be crucial. Make no mistake, this is a slow process. But your documentation gives this weight it might not otherwise have. Layla leaned back, hands clasped lightly in her lap. The tension in the room did not escape her, nor did the weight of anticipation. She had anticipated this moment. Exposure through official channels, a procedural unveiling of Whitman's misconduct. But the emotional toll, the knowledge that a man wielding institutional power could undermine her at every turn, was heavier than any technical calculation. You should take care of yourself, Morales said finally, eyes narrowing with subtle warning. Stress can compromise clarity, and clarity is your strongest asset right now. Layla allowed a faint nod. Self-care was irrelevant. Focus and precision mattered. Emotional distractions were a liability she could not afford. She reviewed her notes again, mentally rehearsing the timeline, ensuring every detail, every word, every recorded glance had its proper place. Later that evening, as she walked through the quiet city streets back to her apartment, she reflected on the chain of events. Public humiliation, office intrusion, cafe confrontation, all part of a pattern of abuse. Institutional response would be slow, bureaucratic, but the process had begun. Her encrypted phone buzzed. A brief message appeared. Monitor escalation. Evidence review in progress. Do not engage directly. She typed a quick acknowledgement, her thoughts already cataloguing future moves. Whitman's underestimation of her patience and foresight was becoming apparent, but she remained vigilant. Every step, every record, every observation, Everything contributed to the slow, methodical process of accountability. Whitman's arrogance would meet the weight of evidence, and she would ensure the system, flawed though it might be, functioned as intended. The city lights shimmered off wet asphalt, reflections bending in puddles. Layla's shadow stretched long and unwavering. For every move Whitman made, she had anticipated 2 steps ahead. The investigation had begun, and the first cracks in his armor were widening. The Civic Plaza was crowded with families and city employees, holiday banners fluttering in the cold breeze. Layla stood at the edge, observing the setup for the minor public event, a local award ceremony for community volunteers. Her presence was professional, unobtrusive, but alert. Whitman, predictably, was already there, leaning against a railing with an easy smirk, scanning the crowd. Layla adjusted her scarf, reminding herself of the stakes. Every public appearance carried risk now. Every move Whitman made could escalate from nuisance to direct threat. She stayed calm, moving deliberately, noting the positions of security officers, surveillance cameras, and escape routes. Whitman's gaze found her almost immediately. "Fancy seeing you here again," he said, voice loud enough to carry, smirk still in place. "Are you following the ceremony, or just watching?" Layla's lips pressed into a tight line. "I am here for official business," she replied, deliberately neutral. "Not for socializing." He chuckled, shifting closer. "Official business. Funny, it looks like you're taking notes. What's the matter? Afraid of making mistakes in front of people?" The crowd shifted uneasily as Whitman's voice carried. Layla's mind catalogued each reaction. The unease in onlookers, the subtle distance they kept, the silent acknowledgement of his public power. He thrived on intimidation, and she understood that. "You're out of line, Officer Whitman," she said, calm but firm. "Your presence here is unauthorized. Step back." Whitman leaned on the railing, shrugging. "Unauthorized? Please. Everyone sees you. I'm just making sure you don't slip up. Wouldn't want your little project to fail, would we?" Layla's pulse quickened, but her demeanor remained composed. She could feel the weight of systemic power pressing down, Whitman's entitlement, the expectation that no one could challenge him publicly. Yet she had countermeasures. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Surveillance active. Monitor quietly. Record all interactions. She glanced at it, reassured by the confirmation. Whitman's arrogance had blinded him. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, was now evidence. A child's laughter broke through the tension, drawing attention from the crowd. Whitman's gaze flicked momentarily, irritation in his posture. Layla seized the moment to step closer to an official security officer, whispering the situation. She didn't need to dramatize, just pointing out irregularity sufficed. Whitman noticed the subtle movement, his smirk faltering. "What's that? Calling in reinforcements?" he muttered under his breath. His fingers flexed, gripping the railing as if resisting a compulsion to escalate. Layla remained calm, almost serene. "I'm merely ensuring proper procedure," she said softly, voice carrying just enough to reach him. "Your actions are being logged. Unauthorized behavior will be reviewed." He froze for a fraction of a second, the tension visible. His smirk was now uneven, confidence challenged. The crowd remained unaware of the full dynamics, but the shift in his demeanor was evident to her trained eye. Whitman's next move was impulsive. He stepped closer, narrowing the space between them, voice low and threatening. "You think this is over? This isn't over." Layla's eyes met his, unflinching. "You are mistaken," she said simply. "Every action has a consequence. Every step you take is documented." For the first time, Whitman hesitated, awareness of exposure creeping into his arrogance. A nearby security camera angled perfectly, capturing his stance, his gestures, his proximity. Every movement was recorded for review, a silent witness to his escalation. Whitman's posture shifted, a subtle retreat, though he masked it with forced bravado. "We'll see," he said, voice tight. "You'll regret being so bold." Layla exhaled quietly, maintaining composure as he walked away, blending into the crowd. She noted every detail, timing, movement, expressions. The escalation had been contained, and yet the underlying threat remained palpable. The official overseeing the event approached, whispering a few words to her. Layla nodded, reassured. The system was responding, slowly but methodically. Every piece of evidence she had compiled, every precaution she had taken, was aligning with institutional oversight. Whitman's arrogance had led him into vulnerability. As the ceremony concluded, Layla's mind catalogued the incident. Public escalation, controlled documentation, surveillance leverage, it was all part of a larger strategy. She understood the emotional cost, tension, stress, the constant calculation of every interaction. But she also understood the importance of restraint. Reckless confrontation could compromise months of work and personal safety. By the time she left the plaza, the sky had darkened, streetlights casting long reflections on wet asphalt. Whitman's shadow had receded, but the threat remained. Every escalation, every arrogance-fueled move, was part of a pattern, and she was prepared to respond methodically. The city felt colder as she walked, the lessons of the day pressing into her mind. Every recorded step, every documented interaction, was a piece of the puzzle. Whitman's miscalculation had left a trail. The threat had escalated, but she remained in control. The morning light filtered through the blinds of the Internal Affairs office, illuminating the stacks of files and digital monitors that lined the walls. Layla sat across from Morales, her posture calm, composed, yet every muscle coiled with anticipation. Today was pivotal, the culmination of meticulous documentation, strategic patience, and controlled observation. Morales tapped a folder containing surveillance stills and time-stamped logs. We've reviewed everything. Plaza incident, office intrusion, cafe confrontation, public event. Every action is documented. You've left no ambiguity. Layla's eyes scanned the photographs, noting the precise alignment of each timestamp. Whitman's smirk, his gestures, the subtle intimidation, it all stood recorded in high-resolution clarity. She had anticipated this moment for weeks, preparing for systemic inertia and bureaucratic resistance. He underestimated you, Morales continued, voice low. Most officers act recklessly, oblivious to oversight. But your documentation leaves him exposed. Any attempt to challenge this now will be futile. Layla exhaled, letting a fraction of tension drain. Exposure is not the goal, she said softly. Accountability is. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for adherence to protocol, to ensure that systemic power is checked. Morales nodded, appreciating the precision in her wording. We'll prepare for an administrative review. Suspension is likely. The investigation team will present the evidence formally, and he will be confronted with it directly. Whitman's downfall, however inevitable, was more than procedural, it was psychological. Layla had catalogued every detail, anticipating not only his actions but also his reactions. She knew the revelation would unsettle him, strip away the veneer of invincibility he had relied upon. The encrypted message on her phone buzzed. Investigation proceeding. Whitman to be notified. Maintain position. She acknowledged it silently, her mind tracing the sequence of events leading to this exposure. By mid-morning, Whitman received the official notice of the administrative review. The news traveled through his precinct like wildfire, whispered among colleagues with varying degrees of shock and vindictive satisfaction. His usual smirk faltered as he read the contents. Detailed accounts of harassment, unauthorized access, threats, and public intimidation, all corroborated by evidence he could neither deny nor manipulate. He attempted to muster a defense, rehearsing excuses and half-truths in his mind. But the photographic and video documentation, combined with witness statements, created an airtight case. Even his arrogance, which had previously shielded him from accountability, could not withstand the weight of methodical evidence. Layla observed from a distance, carefully maintaining discretion. She did not revel in his downfall, she understood the emotional and professional gravity of exposure. Justice, she knew, was procedural and impersonal, not vindictive. Yet a small measure of satisfaction surfaced. The system, imperfect though it was, had begun to function as intended. The liaison from the CIA reached out briefly, confirming that Layla's work remained secure and that no classified materials had been compromised during Whitman's intrusion. Every precaution, every contingency she had planned, had paid off. The delicate balance of exposure and restraint had preserved both her mission and integrity. Whitman's first official meeting with Internal Affairs was tense. Every word spoken, every gesture recorded, scrutinized. His attempts at deflection faltered against the precision of evidence and the professional calm of the investigators. The arrogance that had fueled his actions now became a liability, every smirk and dismissive tone catalogued and cited as indicative of misconduct. Layla, meanwhile, continued her work, the weight of exposure lingering but manageable. She understood the systemic implications. This was not merely about one officer's arrogance, but about how institutional power could be weaponized against those it should protect. Her meticulous records, her strategic patience, and her professional discipline had countered that imbalance effectively. By afternoon, word of Whitman's suspension circulated within the precinct. Colleagues who had once overlooked or excused his behavior now whispered, hesitant but aware. The balance of power had shifted, the threat was mitigated, and accountability was underway. Layla's reflections were precise, almost clinical. She catalogued the psychological and emotional toll, tension, stress, anticipatory vigilance. Each encounter with Whitman had tested her boundaries, honed her strategic acumen, and deepened her understanding of systemic bias. The revelation of his misconduct was a turning point, but it did not erase the cumulative strain of his harassment. As the day closed, she returned to her apartment, streets quiet under a setting sun. Whitman's shadow, once looming, had been exposed. The threat had been neutralized, not through confrontation or impulsive retaliation, but through methodical, calculated action. Layla allowed herself a brief moment of acknowledgement, of survival, of strategic patience, of justice executed within procedural bounds. The battle was not over. Systemic inequities persisted. Yet, for now, accountability had prevailed, exposing the arrogance and misconduct of one man, while reinforcing the strength and resilience of another. Whitman's realization, finally, was complete. He had underestimated her patience, her foresight, and the unyielding precision of documentation. Exposure was no longer a threat, it was a certainty. The city skyline glowed in the late afternoon sun, reflections of high-rise windows scattering light across the streets. Layla returned to her apartment, the weight of months of confrontation and investigation pressing lightly on her shoulders. The news coverage of Whitman's suspension had circulated widely, public commentary abundant. But for her, the fallout was less about public opinion and more about the system's response and her own resilience. Her apartment smelled faintly of brewed coffee and paper. The remnants of notes, drafts, and secure documents cluttered her workspace. She set her bag down, sitting at her desk, reviewing logs, encrypted messages, and internal communications. Every precaution she had taken, every detail she had recorded, now formed a tapestry of accountability. Whitman's fall was total, yet the emotional residue lingered. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages. CIA liaison reports, follow-ups from Internal Affairs, and reminders about operational security filled the screen. Each message reinforced the reality. She had survived an extended test of patience, skill, and strategic foresight. But she also recognized the emotional toll. Months of heightened vigilance, calculated responses, and the constant anticipation of retaliation had not left her unscathed. Layla's thoughts drifted briefly to the moments at the plaza, the cafe, the office, and the public event. Each encounter had demanded precision, self-control, and unwavering documentation. She had faced intimidation, mockery, and systemic entitlement firsthand, yet had emerged with integrity intact. The pattern of harassment, once oppressive, had become an instrument for exposure. Across town, Whitman navigated the immediate aftermath of his suspension. Calls from superiors, internal review meetings, and colleagues' whispered judgments created a tension he had not experienced before. The arrogance that once insulated him was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Every misstep he had taken was now public record, corroborated, and irrefutable. Layla, however, did not dwell on his downfall. She returned to her research, drafting reports on linguistic patterns, operational protocols, and counterintelligence measures. Her focus remained on her professional responsibilities, ensuring that her work continued uninterrupted. Vigilance was now a tool for protection rather than reactive defense. A secure message arrived. All incidents logged. Whitman's administrative review complete. Continue with operational schedule. Layla noted the finality in the procedural language, but also the lingering caution. Systemic patterns did not disappear with one suspension. Vigilance was required to prevent repetition. Evening descended over the city. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across wet asphalt. Layla stepped onto her balcony, observing the quiet streets below. The city moved on, unaware of the intricate battles occurring behind bureaucratic doors and surveillance monitors. The emotional cost she bore was invisible, yet real. Months of subtle intimidation, microaggressions, and threat calculations had demanded endurance and discipline. Layla allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The system, imperfect and often flawed, had responded when guided by evidence, patience, and methodical persistence. Whitman's fall was not merely personal retribution. It was an institutional correction, a demonstration that unchecked arrogance and misuse of authority could meet consequence. Yet she recognized the limitations. Structural bias, systemic oversight, and unexamined entitlement persisted beyond one individual. The fight for accountability was ongoing, requiring constant attention, vigilance, and procedural rigor. Whitman's downfall was instructive, but it did not erase the broader landscape of inequality and abuse. Her phone buzzed again with an internal CIA notification. Next briefing scheduled. Prepare accordingly. Layla acknowledged it, her focus shifting seamlessly. Operational readiness required continued discipline, the same precision that had guided her through harassment, threat management, and exposure. Layla reflected on the duality of her experience, the personal and the professional, the emotional and the procedural. She had endured mockery, public humiliation, and systemic arrogance, yet she had transformed each encounter into evidence, strategy, and ultimately, accountability. Her resilience was not about personal vindication. It was about ensuring the integrity of the mission, the safety of sensitive information, and the principle of lawful oversight. By nightfall, the apartment was quiet. Notes were organized, surveillance records stored, and encrypted messages cleared. The city, indifferent to individual struggles, continued its rhythm, but the system she had navigated had shifted subtly under her influence. Whitman's influence had waned. Institutional mechanisms had been activated effectively. Layla leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Months of tension, careful observation, and calculated responses had culminated in exposure, procedural justice, and partial resolution. The personal cost, the subtle fatigue, emotional vigilance, and constant anticipation remained, but it was outweighed by the affirmation that methodical patience and integrity could withstand systemic power when wielded correctly. The night deepened, and Layla turned off the lights, the soft glow of monitors fading. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, and continued vigilance. Whitman's fall marked an ending for him, but for her, it was a reminder. Systemic injustice demanded both patience and precision, and those who wielded integrity with strategy could endure where arrogance faltered. The city newsroom buzzed with activity, monitors flashing headlines and live feeds. Whitman's name appeared across multiple screens. Officer suspended amid harassment allegations, and investigation reveals misconduct by local police officer. Layla sat quietly in a corner booth of a small cafe, scrolling through the coverage. Each article confirmed what she had already known. Meticulous documentation and patience had forced accountability. Whitman's fall was public now, but the full weight of exposure was only beginning. Colleagues who had once idolized him or overlooked his arrogance now whispered behind his back. Friends within the force questioned their allegiance. The smug confidence that had sustained him for years had evaporated, replaced by unease, suspicion, and professional isolation. Layla's phone buzzed. An encrypted message from the CIA liaison read, "Media exposure underway. Continue operations as planned. Maintain discretion." She acknowledged it silently. Her mission remained intact, and her focus returned to her work. The public may have witnessed the fallout, but she had orchestrated it without compromising classified material or operational integrity. Inside the precinct, Whitman faced administrative hearings. Each session, every procedural review, emphasized the evidence she had provided: surveillance footage, witness statements, documented interactions, and logs of unauthorized activity. The dialogue-heavy hearings left no room for misrepresentation. Investigators questioned his decisions, his timing, and the appropriateness of his actions. Whitman attempted to argue, tried to deflect, and even tried to charm the hearing officers. But every smirk, every half-truth, and every attempt at intimidation was countered with precision. The sheer weight of evidence, combined with professional testimony, left him cornered. Colleagues who had witnessed his public harassment were called to provide statements. Hesitation marked some testimonies, but the consistency of accounts created a web of undeniable misconduct. Whitman's previously unchecked power crumbled under scrutiny. Outside the hearings, local news crews documented his suspension and pending disciplinary action. Social media amplified the story, community members sharing accounts of his public arrogance and behavior. The systemic imbalance that had allowed him to act with impunity was being challenged by exposure and accountability. Layla observed quietly, her posture calm, but her mind catalogued each development. Every statement, every headline, every public reaction reinforced her strategy. Evidence and patience outweighed brute authority. Whitman's arrogance, once a shield, had become the instrument of his downfall. The hearings concluded with a formal suspension and pending review for potential dismissal. His professional reputation lay in ruins. The fall was total, orchestrated not by vengeance but by methodical diligence. Colleagues who had once laughed at his jokes or ignored his microaggressions now avoided him, their silence a subtle indictment. Layla returned to her office, the hum of fluorescent lights familiar and grounding. She reflected on the psychological and emotional weight of the months-long confrontation. Each public humiliation she had endured, each subtle intimidation, had reinforced her resolve and honed her strategic thinking. Whitman's collapse was not a simple victory. It was the product of careful observation, documentation, and patience. The city, meanwhile, watched. The headlines were more than gossip. They were a record of systemic challenge, evidence that unchecked arrogance and abuse of authority could meet consequences. Layla's approach had ensured that the procedural mechanisms functioned as intended, highlighting both the flaws and the strengths of institutional oversight. Whitman's personal downfall was mirrored by professional consequences. Job offers rescinded, colleagues distancing themselves, and his public image tarnished irreparably. Yet the emotional cost to Layla was nuanced. The months of tension, constant vigilance, and psychological strain had left traces of fatigue and weariness. She had succeeded, but not without paying a price in stress and emotional labor. By evening, the city streets glistened under lamplight, reflections shimmering on wet asphalt. Layla walked with measured steps, cataloging lessons learned. Patience as a weapon, evidence as leverage, restraint as power. Her victory was procedural, not personal. Whitman had fallen, not through confrontation or rage, but because the system, when guided by vigilance and integrity, could still function as intended. She paused at a corner, watching the reflection of neon lights ripple across a puddle. Justice had been served in its most measured form: exposure, accountability, and consequence. Whitman's arrogance had been his undoing. Layla's resilience had preserved her dignity, her mission, and the principles she had upheld throughout the ordeal. The fall was complete. And yet, even in success, Layla understood that vigilance against systemic abuse was never-ending. Whitman's collapse was one chapter. The broader struggle for accountability, fairness, and respect persisted. But for now, the scales had shifted, if only slightly, in favor of methodical truth and ethical persistence. The city skyline glowed in the late afternoon sun, reflections of high-rise windows scattering light across the streets. Layla returned to her apartment, the weight of months of confrontation and investigation pressing lightly on her shoulders. The news coverage of Whitman's suspension had circulated widely, public commentary abundant. But for her, the fallout was less about public opinion and more about the system's response and her own resilience. Her apartment smelled faintly of brewed coffee and paper. The remnants of notes, drafts, and secure documents cluttered her workspace. She set her bag down, sitting at her desk, reviewing logs, encrypted messages, and internal communications. Every precaution she had taken, every detail she had recorded, now formed a tapestry of accountability. Whitman's fall was total, yet the emotional residue lingered. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages. CIA liaison reports, follow-ups from internal affairs, and reminders about operational security filled the screen. Each message reinforced the reality. She had survived an extended test of patience, skill, and strategic foresight. But she also recognized the emotional toll. Months of heightened vigilance, calculated responses, and the constant anticipation of retaliation had not left her unscathed. Layla's thoughts drifted briefly to the moments at the plaza, the cafe, the office, and the public event. Each encounter had demanded precision, self-control, and unwavering documentation. She had faced intimidation, mockery, and systemic entitlement firsthand, yet had emerged with integrity intact. The pattern of harassment, once oppressive, had become an instrument for exposure. Across town, Whitman navigated the immediate aftermath of his suspension. Calls from superiors, internal review meetings, and colleagues' whispered judgments created a tension he had not experienced before. The arrogance that once insulated him was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Every misstep he had taken was now public record, corroborated, and irrefutable. Layla, however, did not dwell on his downfall. She returned to her research, drafting reports on linguistic patterns, operational protocols, and counterintelligence measures. Her focus remained on her professional responsibilities, ensuring that her work continued uninterrupted. Vigilance was now a tool for protection rather than reactive defense. A secure message arrived, all incidents logged. Whitman's administrative review complete. Continue with operational schedule. Layla noted the finality in the procedural language, but also the lingering caution. Systemic patterns did not disappear with one suspension. Vigilance was required to prevent repetition. Evening descended over the city. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across wet asphalt. Layla stepped onto her balcony, observing the quiet streets below. The city moved on, unaware of the intricate battles occurring behind bureaucratic doors and surveillance monitors. The emotional cost she bore was invisible, yet real. Months of subtle intimidation, microaggressions, and threat calculations had demanded endurance and discipline. Layla allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The system, imperfect and often flawed, had responded when guided by evidence, patience, and methodical persistence. Whitman's fall was not merely personal retribution. It was an institutional correction, a demonstration that unchecked arrogance and misuse of authority could meet consequence. Yet she recognized the limitations. Structural bias, systemic oversight, and unexamined entitlement persisted beyond one individual. The fight for accountability was ongoing, requiring constant attention, vigilance, and procedural rigor. Whitman's downfall was instructive, but it did not erase the broader landscape of inequality and abuse. Her phone buzzed again with an internal CIA notification. Next briefing scheduled. Prepare accordingly. Layla acknowledged it, her focus shifting seamlessly. Operational readiness required continued discipline, the same precision that had guided her through harassment, threat management, and exposure. Layla reflected on the duality of her experience, the personal and the professional, the emotional and the procedural. She had endured mockery, public humiliation, and systemic arrogance, yet she had transformed each encounter into evidence, strategy, and ultimately, accountability. Her resilience was not about personal vindication. It was about ensuring the integrity of the mission, the safety of sensitive information, and the principle of lawful oversight. By nightfall, the apartment was quiet. Notes were organized, surveillance records stored, and encrypted messages cleared. The city, indifferent to individual struggles, continued its rhythm, but the system she had navigated had shifted subtly under her influence. Whitman's influence had waned. Institutional mechanisms had been activated effectively. Layla leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Months of tension, careful observation, and calculated responses had culminated in exposure, procedural justice, and partial resolution. The personal cost, The subtle fatigue, emotional vigilance, and constant anticipation remained, but it was outweighed by the affirmation that methodical patience and integrity could withstand systemic power when wielded correctly. The night deepened, and Layla turned off the lights, the soft glow of monitors fading. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, and continued vigilance. Whitman's fall marked an ending for him, but for her, it was a reminder. Systemic injustice demanded both patience and precision, and those who wielded integrity with strategy could endure where arrogance faltered. The morning air was crisp as Layla walked through the secure CIA compound, the hum of activity around her a familiar rhythm. Months of careful documentation, surveillance, and strategic patience had culminated in a sense of professional closure, yet the echoes of tension from past harassment still lingered subtly beneath the surface. Whitman's official termination had been finalized. The administrative review concluded with suspension, pending formal dismissal, and a cascade of professional consequences. His arrogance, once a shield, had become a liability, exposed through meticulous evidence and unyielding procedural rigor. The city, the institution, and even the public had glimpsed the systemic accountability she had orchestrated through careful strategy rather than confrontation. Layla's footsteps echoed through the corridor as she approached her office. Each step was deliberate, measured, a reflection of the vigilance and precision that had defined her months-long ordeal. Colleagues offered polite nods, some with subtle admiration, though the majority maintained professional distance. Recognition was present, but understated. She had achieved results without spectacle or personal posturing. Her desk was organized, notes and files aligned in precise order. She reviewed the last messages from internal affairs. Whitman terminated. Records archived. Incident closed. A small exhale of relief escaped her lips, tempered by the awareness that systemic challenges persisted beyond any single individual. The victory was procedural, not personal, and it carried its own nuanced weight. The CIA liaison appeared at her doorway, professional but approving. "Layla, your handling of this situation has been exemplary. You've maintained operational security, documented everything, and ensured accountability without compromising your mission. Few could navigate harassment and systemic bias with such precision." Layla inclined her head slightly. "Thank you. It was necessary to maintain both personal and procedural integrity. The focus has always been on adherence to protocol, not retaliation." The liaison offered a small nod before leaving, the subtle acknowledgement reinforcing the lesson. Vigilance, evidence, and patience outweighed impulsive confrontation. Whitman's downfall had been inevitable once the system, guided by precise documentation and strategic foresight, functioned correctly. Layla returned to her work, reviewing linguistic patterns and operational protocols, her mind sharp and disciplined. Yet she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on the emotional weight of recent months, the constant calculation of risk, the restraint required in public and professional spheres, the tension between survival and ethical oversight. These were not trivial costs. They were part of the reality of confronting systemic abuse while maintaining operational responsibility. The office phone buzzed, an encrypted call from her liaison. Updates on ongoing operations, minor adjustments in surveillance protocols, and strategic guidance. She listened intently, integrating each directive into her mental map of operational readiness. The procedural machinery continued to function, requiring her sustained attention, discipline, and vigilance. By afternoon, Layla stepped out into the city streets, the sunlight reflecting off wet asphalt and glass facades. Whitman's shadow, once oppressive, had dissipated. The procedural victory, achieved through patience, documentation, and strategic foresight, was complete. Public exposure, institutional accountability, and internal monitoring ensured that his misuse of authority could not recur unchecked. She paused at a corner, observing the rhythm of the city. Pedestrians, traffic, vendors, each unaware of the intricate battles that had transpired behind closed doors. The emotional cost, the vigilance, the strain, remained her burden, but the efficacy of methodical patience was undeniable. Whitman's collapse had not been impulsive or spectacular. It was precise, procedural, and inevitable once confronted with unassailable evidence and careful strategy. Her phone vibrated, another encrypted update. Operational readiness confirmed. Continue standard schedule. Layla acknowledged, integrating the information seamlessly into her day. The mission, the broader purpose, remained paramount. Personal satisfaction was secondary to systemic efficacy. Evening descended, and she returned to her apartment. The city skyline glittered against the darkening sky, reflections shimmering across puddles and asphalt. She reviewed notes one last time, cataloguing lessons learned. Patience as a weapon, documentation as leverage, restraint as power. Each encounter with Whitman had reinforced these principles, sharpening her strategic mind and resilience. Layla allowed herself a small measure of recognition. Whitman had been dismantled not through anger, confrontation, or impulsive retaliation, but through meticulous observation, strategic patience, and adherence to systemic procedure. Justice, procedural and ethical, had been achieved. The night deepened, and she prepared for sleep, turning off monitors and securing files. Her reflection lingered on the balance of power, the nuances of accountability, and the ongoing need for vigilance in the face of systemic bias. Whitman's fall was complete, yet it was only a singular victory within a larger landscape of challenges. As she closed her eyes, the city outside quieted under streetlights, the hum of distant traffic a constant reminder of ongoing life. Layla's mind, sharp and disciplined, catalogued the final lessons. Methodical patience, meticulous documentation, ethical integrity. The resolution was procedural, professional, and strategic, a testament to endurance, vigilance, and foresight in the face of systemic abuse. Whitman's downfall was complete. Layla's mission continued.